Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 38 in a clear and simple way, step by step. But before we begin, ask yourself this. Who is the hero in a story with no perfect characters? How do we actually navigate a text where every single person makes morally complex, sometimes truly shocking choices? Well, today's explainer takes us directly into one of the most fascinating and deeply human narratives in all of biblical literature. So, let's jump right into this. We are going to walk chronologically through the dramatic twists, the hidden identities, and the ancient customs of Genesis chapter 38, looking at the original text step by step and verse by verse. Section 1. A complex biblical narrative. To really grasp what's happening here, we need just a quick bit of context about the genre we're reading. Genesis 38 is a self-contained story focusing entirely on Judah and his family. As our source notes, narrative literature documents the work done in and through completely ordinary people. You see, biblical characters shouldn't be boxed into simple hero or villain categories. They are deeply, deeply human, capable of both immense good and profound failures. And you'll definitely want to keep that in mind as we evaluate the actions of Judah and Tamar today. Section 2. Judah's family and loss. Let's start at the beginning and map out Judah's family tree, because this is absolutely crucial for understanding the intense conflict that's about to unfold. In verses 1 through 5, we see Judah separate from his brothers and go down to stay with a man named Hira in a place called Adullam. While he's there, Judah meets and marries the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. Together, they have 3 sons in fairly quick succession. First up is Now, the root of his name in Hebrew can imply watchfulness, but it can also be flipped to mean evil, which, as we'll see, is pretty fitting. Next is Onan, whose name implies vigor or strength. And finally, a third son named Shelah, meaning petition or request, who was born at a place called Kezib. So Judah is building a legacy, establishing his family line right there in the land of Canaan. Moving into verses 6 and 7, Judah arranges a marriage for his firstborn son, He chooses a woman named Tamar, a name meaning date palm, which was a symbol of beauty and fruitfulness. But the text tells us something really abrupt and tragic. Was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord puts him to death. Now, the original Hebrew text doesn't explicitly tell us what his specific sin was, just that his actions were evil, resulting in his sudden death. This leaves Tamar as a childless widow. And in ancient society, that was a huge deal. It meant she was left completely vulnerable, without an heir to provide for her future or guarantee her physical safety. Section 3. The brothers' duty denied. This initial tragedy brings us right to a specific ancient custom that essentially acts as the catalyst for the entire rest of the plot in verses 8 through 10. Judah instructs his second son, Onan, to step in. He tells him to perform the duty of a brother-in-law. In the ancient world, this is known as a levirate marriage, or in Hebrew, yibum. It was the strict obligation of a surviving brother to marry his deceased brother's widow in order to produce an heir. This offspring would carry on the dead brother's name and inherit his property, essentially ensuring the widow is protected and the family line continued. But Onan absolutely refuses to fulfill this duty. Verse 9 clearly states that Onan knew the offspring would not officially be his. So whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he deliberately spilled his seed on the ground to keep from producing an heir for his brother. This was a profoundly selfish act. He was using Tamar physically, but intentionally denying her the one thing, the child, that she needed for her very survival and security. And because what he did was evil in the Lord's sight, Onan is put to death as well. Okay, so now you can imagine Judah is absolutely terrified. He has just lost 2 sons in a row. In verse 11, instead of giving his third son, Shelah, to Tamar to fulfill that sacred family duty, Judah tells her, "Live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." But internally, Judah is operating out of sheer blinding fear. He's thinking he might die too, just like his brothers. So he sends Tamar away with a promise for the future, but ultimately, he completely intends to abandon her just to avoid risking his last remaining son. Section 4. Tamar's bold deception. Verses 12 through 14 tell us that a long time passes. During this period, Judah's wife actually dies. After he recovers from his grief, he plans a trip to Timnah to shear his sheep. Meanwhile, Tamar realizes that Shelah has grown into a man, yet she has still not been given to him as a wife. Judah has completely broken his promise. Finding herself abandoned, with her entire future erased, she decides to take matters into her own hands. Hearing that her father-in-law Judah is on his way to Timnah, Tamar makes a highly calculated move. She deliberately takes off her widow's garments, the very clothes that visually mark her prolonged, vulnerable status. She covers herself with a veil to completely disguise her face, and she positions herself directly on his travel route, sitting right at the entrance to a place called Enayam. Now, check out the incredible dramatic irony of verses 15 and 16. Judah sees her sitting by the roadside, and because her face is veiled, he assumes she is a prostitute. He walks right up and propositions her, completely unaware that the woman he is speaking to is his own daughter-in-law. When she asks what he'll pay her, he promises to send her a young goat from his flock. Section 5. The Pledges of Identity. Tamar agrees to the transaction, but she is highly intelligent, and she's thinking a few steps ahead. She knows a verbal promise of a goat isn't nearly enough security. So, she makes a brilliant demand for collateral to hold until the animal is officially delivered. In verse 18, she asks for 3 specific items: his seal, its cord, and the staff in his hand. Paying attention to key objects is absolutely vital when reading narrative literature like this. These aren't just random everyday items. In the ancient Near East, a person's seal and their carved staff functioned exactly like a modern ID card and signature rolled into one. They were highly personal, undeniable proof of a person's identity and authority. And Judah, caught up in the heat of the moment, hands them right over. Let's look at verses 18 through 23 and see how this all builds. Judah sleeps with her, leaves his highly personal pledges, and then departs. The text tells us she becomes pregnant. Tamar then immediately leaves, takes off her veil, and puts her widow's clothes back on. Sometime later, Judah sends his friend, Hira the Adullamite, to deliver the young goat and retrieve his identification items, but his friend just can't find her. When he asks the local men where the shrine prostitute is, they tell him there has never been one there. Judah basically decides to cut his losses, saying, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock." Section 6. Judgment and Revelation. But, the truth never stays buried for long. About 3 months later, the severe, hidden consequences of this roadside encounter are dragged right out into the open in verses 24 through 26. Word reaches Judah with a scandalous report. Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah, completely blind to his own hypocrisy, immediately acts as the ultimate moral judge over her life. Enraged, he issues a swift and totally brutal sentence: bring her out and have her burned to death. Just as she is being brought out to face a truly horrific execution, Tamar plays her absolute masterstroke. She doesn't scream, and she doesn't accuse him publicly to shame him. Instead, she quietly sends a message to her father-in-law along with those 3 hidden objects. I am pregnant by the man who owns these. See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. She forces Judah to literally look at the undeniable evidence and confront the reality of his own actions. And this brings us to the crucial turning point right here in verse 26. Judah looks at his seal, his cord, and his staff. He recognizes them immediately. And in a moment of profound, heavy realization and humility, he admits his own failure. He declares, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." He acknowledges publicly that Tamar's deception, while morally complex, was driven by a righteous desire to preserve the family line, whereas his own neglect was driven purely by fear and selfishness. The verse concludes by noting he did not sleep with her again. The chapter finally concludes in verses 27 to 30 with Tamar giving birth. True to the chaotic nature of this family's story, even the birth is a struggle. She has twin boys. As she's giving birth, one puts his hand out first, and the midwife ties a scarlet thread on his wrist to mark him as the firstborn, naming him Zerah. But then, he draws his hand back, and his brother literally pushes past him, breaking out to be born first. He is given the name Perez, which in Hebrew literally means breaking out. This chaotic reversal in the birth order perfectly mirrors the unexpected narrative twists, the broken traditions, and the complex human maneuvers we just witnessed throughout the entire chapter. As we wrap up this explainer, let's do a quick recap. We watch Judah completely fail in his family duties, Tamar take bold, deceptive action to secure her future, and a dramatic roadside revelation bring the whole truth to light. Now we must look at the simple, practical life lessons embedded in this text. Viewing both Judah and Tamar as complex, flawed humans really changes how we read these ancient records. It teaches us that God's plans very often move forward through incredibly imperfect people in messy, complicated situations. More importantly, it challenges us to take responsibility for our own actions and to genuinely honor our commitments to others. just as Judah ultimately had to look at his own seal and staff and admit his wrongdoings. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.